Hey guys, it's been a little while since our last one. Nice to see you again. Hope all of you are doing very well. I've been doing a ton of automotive related stuff, and today we're finally going to do the install of the nitrous kit on the cheap Jaguar. Get it to our goal, 500 horsepower under $5,000. But before we jump into that, I have to give a major thanks to two people who have helped me out substantially these last several days. I purchased two new project cars from the auctions, and I couldn't have done it without first the help of eRepairables. Now, if you're a follower of this channel, you already know about eRepairables. They're the guys that help me buy cars from the auction because I don't hold a dealer's license, and a lot of states require you to have a dealer's license to buy a car at auction. So if you're looking at cars at Copart and you're interested in one but can't buy one because you don't have a dealer's license, check the link in the description box below and they'll help you get started in buying your car at the auction. The second person I really have to thank is a guy named Bob over at TAC Transport. They're responsible for bringing me all of my project cars, and there's actually one on the way in the next 20 minutes here. So I gotta wrap this up to get the car. Now, Bob is one of the most honest shipping brokers I've dealt with, and I'm gonna do a video on vehicle shipping because it is such a convoluted topic. It's absolutely incredible, some of the stuff I'm gonna show you that goes on in that industry. However, Bob is one of the most honest guys I've personally met when it comes to that, and likely the most fair price. He's the guy responsible for getting Tavares's Lamborghini all the way from California and bringing it here to Florida. Thanks so much to Bob. I'm also going to link him in the description box below if you need help with any sort of vehicle shipping assistance. Now guys, let's jump right into that nitrous build. All right, so what we're installing here is a nitrous wet kit. That means that nitrous is mixing with fuel and then going into the intake of the car versus a dry kit, which is just nitrous by itself. Apparently, it's a little bit safer, especially on applications that we're not so familiar with, like a Jaguar. Now, this car's a little bit different than others. It's got a plastic air filter housing, which is pretty standard, which goes into a plastic tube, which is pretty standard, which goes into a metal tube. That's where things aren't so standard. That metal tube slopes down into the throttle body, and that's close to the area where we need to focus on installing our nitrous jet. So I went ahead and disassembled the entire intake setup, and it turns out that you actually need to take the whole cowl off the car in order to get the metal intake tube out of the car. No big deal. It was actually very simple, very straightforward, and I was able to clean some of the leaves out of the front area of the engine compartment. So here's kind of the oddly placed throttle body, and here's the metal intake tube, which I took into the shop to go ahead and drill a hole underneath. Thought it would be really neat to mount the nitrous nozzle in kind of a hidden place. Now I went ahead and installed it there. When I got it back to the car and fitted it, it fit well, but it's when I went and put the steel braided lines on the end of the jets that it gave me a problem and was hitting the top of the supercharger. From there, I learned that I should have probably mocked everything up before I started drilling holes, but it's all good. The speed shop that I got my nitrous bottle filled at had the exact size plug for the hole that I drilled, so I went ahead and just plugged that hole, and I mocked things up on the passenger side since I knew that that's where my power would be coming from inside the cabin. So everything you see here in the engine bay is the majority of your supercharger kit. It's the solenoids that are shooting the fuel and the nitrous, running to a bunch of lines coming in and lines going out, just like everything else. One of the other reasons I put this on the passenger side is that the Schrader valve that I wanted to get my fuel from is located on the passenger side. All right, it's time to tap our fuel source. Right here is a Schrader valve on the fuel rail. You usually use that for like a fuel pressure tester gauge if you're having, issues with fuel. Basically, we're just going to take the inside of the Schrader valve out. I've got two fittings here. We only need one of them. But since they didn't come with the kit and I wanted to make sure I got the right piece, we're basically going to use whichever one actually fits. Let me see if this one, see this is too big, so this one's not even going to work. This should be the right size, and actually now I'm looking at it, it's fucking not. Alright, so this is the part where I get frustrated during the install and it takes me a day longer than it should. Basically, I ordered two different fittings. I ordered two different fittings because two different nitrous companies recommended each different one to fit this car right here. Neither of them fit this car right here. And when I actually figured out what that Schrader valve fitting was, it turns out that they don't actually make a direct adapter. Maybe you could adapt another adapter and have it work, but either way, I'd have to wait another week in order to get one. Why it's taken so long for me to install the nitrous kit in the first place. At this point, I knew I had to resort to using the basic T fitting that came for your standard fuel line. That's really like the basic quick way of hooking this up. And if I don't have to hack apart fuel lines, I don't like to, but since there was no other option, I started doing that. So I make my first cut in the fuel line to fit the T-fitting, and I realize that I'm not dealing with a standard fuel line here. This is a regular standard fuel hose, but inside of it is a hardened plastic fuel hose. When I went and removed the line that goes directly into the fuel rail, I then realized this isn't a standard fuel inline on a fuel rail. No big deal. I ran out to the auto parts store, bought a bunch of fuel hose, and I modified the factory fuel line to a standard fuel hose line. Even though it's not like the one from the factory, at the very least it is 14 years newer. I went and adapted the T-fitting and hooked everything up. It went in pretty solid, and there were no fuel leaks when I test started it. Now, since we're adding a sizable amount of power to this car, specifically right now a 75 shot is what I'm going to use to test this system on, we have to change to a colder spark plug. This is a colder spark plug that a lot of supercharged LS engines use, but it's an easy one and a cheap one that you can find locally at your auto parts store. Once you've seen me install one spark plug, it might seem repetitive. However, that's not always the case. I tend to judge a car's easeability of repair by how hard it is to get to its spark plugs. A lot of the times when I've dealt with spark plugs on foreign V8 cars, they're sometimes hidden underneath something and there's another piece in the engine bay in the way, and it can make the job a total hassle. It really made me respect that out of this 14-year-old car that was very fast specifically for its time, how simple it really is to work on. Yes, there's a lot of stuff going on here in the engine bay, some stuff completely overdone like its intake setup. However, for a car with a supercharger on it, even though it might take a little bit more time to remove and work on the things, at least everything is right there, easy to get to, and fairly simple to work on. Besides electrical, which we'll get to in a moment, the last line that needs to be hooked up is the nitrous line that goes to the solenoid and runs all the way to the bottle that I'm going to put in the trunk. Now, the big key here is to make sure you run the nitrous line outside of the car in case there are any sort of leak. You don't want that going in the cabin. And run it away from anything hot like your exhaust and any moving parts like your suspension or axles. I used an existing hole in the trunk area of the car to run the line through, and it really worked out perfect. Last thing here, we got to just grab our bottle, which I have sitting in the Florida sun. That's our budget bottle heater. And now we're just one step away from actually using the nitrous in this car. I left the electrical for last. The box that says Proton on it is our solenoid that needs power. It has a power and a ground cable coming from it. If you look really closely, you'll see the red and the black wires. The black wire I just tapped there in the engine bay. The red wire I connected a standard wire to and ran it down underneath the dashboard here. It runs all the way around and underneath the shifter. You can kind of see one of the wires I have hanging out right here that I just need to tuck underneath the trim. So that runs to this wire here. When I press this, it will open or close the solenoid. But in order for that to operate, you need the master switch turned on. And of course, the car also needs to be on. Now, the master switch also needs power and ground, and that will then run power to the switch here. I've taken the trim off, obviously, to install all of these switches and be able to conceal the wires when I'm all done. But my thought about keeping the switches here on the shifter is because you're going to be in this manual mode when you're using nitrous. And I think it's the smartest idea to be able to hit the button and move the shifter so that you're not in the middle of spraying the nitrous while you're shifting. I've heard that that's not good, especially for an automatic transmission. When I talked to my friend Alex over at Legit Street Cars, he told me that really you are the best fail-safe. So make sure you place all of your nitrous switches in close range to where your shifter is. So let me know what your thought is of the buttons being around the shifter area. I think it's a good idea. The only thing I'm a little bit skeptical of is drilling in the actual trim. I have it right here. It is a 14-year-old car, so I'm not too worried about it, but I don't like drilling holes in places that I don't have to. But clearly, this is not set in stone yet, so if there's a place that you think it would be better, well, we could try that. I would love to wire it here behind the steering wheel somewhere. The only issue with that is then disassembling the entire steering wheel, which would become an entire other nuisance. All right, we are ready for our first drive with nitrous. We have the bottle open and strapped into place with a very high quality bungee cord. We have all the cables running around all over the place. on the inside of the car like I showed you before, and I haven't even taken the time to put the cowl back on here. I think it's safe to say that we have a totally legit nitrous install that's slightly ghetto. So check out my bougie ass nitrous setup. This is how it's gonna go down. First of all, we're gonna turn the traction control off, which actually doesn't kill the traction control completely. It just will cut power to the wheels if the car turns sideways, which I think is a good thing. We've got our button armed, and here's our nitrous button. But then we're gonna put the S button on, which holds the gears longer, and we're gonna manually shift it. Right now, since I don't have it mounted, I can actually hold the button and the shifter at the same time. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, and we're already at like 8 miles an hour, so that was pretty darn quick. All right, so we are in second gear, 3, 2, 1. Whoa, whoa, whoa. It's a good thing this car has not only big brakes, but brand new front brakes, because they just assisted us in what could have been a bad situation. Turns out we're in the part of Mexico with some bad drivers, so gotta watch out for that. Now, to find out how much power this car is making exactly, got to do a baseline run without the nitrous, then do one with the nitrous on a dyno somewhere. I'm looking into that right now, and it feels to me like it's about 60-70 wheel horsepower, which would be pretty accurate for a 75 shot. Now, of course, we can get to our goal by upping the jets, but I'll be honest, I've hit this nitrous button a bunch of times since I've had it installed, and it's worked so well. I don't hear any knocking, pinging in conjunction with the colder spark plugs. I think this setup is really solid as it is, so I want to see how much power it makes first. It's a possibility that because this car is supercharged and the supercharger generates a lot of heat, the cooling effect from the nitrous could actually add more than the 70 wheel horsepower, bringing us darn close to our 500 horsepower goal, and that's 500 at the crank. So we'll have a power update when we can actually get this car on a dyno. Until then, we've got some exciting new projects coming. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to show you those, but it'll be very soon, so stay tuned for that. If you have any questions for me, as always, be sure to check the information in the description box below. There you'll find my contact information. Guys, make sure you drive safe, and I will catch you very soon.